Hello and welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Manager for DataVersity. We'd like to thank you for joining today's DataVersity webinar, Unlock Business Value Using Reference and Master Data Management Strategies. It is the latest installment in a monthly series called DataEd Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. Just a couple of points to get us started. Due to the large number of people that attend these sessions, you will be muted during the webinar. For questions, we will be collecting them via the Q&A in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or if you like to tweet, we encourage you to share highlights or questions via Twitter using hashtag DataEd. And if you'd like to chat with us or with each other, we certainly encourage you to do so. Just click the chat icon in the bottom middle of your screen for that feature. And to continue the conversation and networking after the webinar, just go to community.dataversity.net. To answer the most commonly asked questions, as always, we will send a follow-up email to all registrants within 2 business days containing links to the slides. And yes, we are recording and will likewise send a link to the recording of this session, as well as any additional information requested throughout the webinar. Now let me introduce to you our speaker for today, Dr. Peter Aiken. Peter is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. Many of you already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide. He has more than 30 years experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. Peter is also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written dozens of articles and 11 books. The most recent is Your Data Strategy. Peter is experienced with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as a top data management expert. Some of the most important and largest organizations in the world have sought out his and Data Blueprint's expertise. Peter has spent multi-year immersions with groups as diverse as U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, and the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. And with that, let me turn everything over to Peter to get today's webinar started. Hello and welcome.
And hi, and welcome to you, Shannon, and of course to everybody else. It's so good to be speaking with everybody here. Our topic today is reference and master data management, and we always take them in twos because, as you see, they are fundamentally connected to each other. So let's just dive in and talk about what we're going to talk about. First of all, as always, I start off with a bit of contextual information to make sure everybody gets this. We'll dive then specifically into what is reference and master data management, and then why are they important. Then we'll talk about some very specific building blocks that you can use, because we've been at this for long enough now that you do not need to start from ground zero, although it is the most common entry point that we have after the development of an organizational strategy. We'll finish up with some guiding principles, best practices. I'll play you a cute little video towards the end there that may help you to understand the articulation behind it. And then we'll talk about some takeaways, and we'll move to the Q&A part. Now, one of the reasons we're doing this is because there's very poor understanding out there outside of our community. You have to remember that those of us that are on the call and that participate in these events are specialized in terms of what we know and understand, and that our knowledge of data far exceeds the vast majority of everybody else that's in there. So the perceived state of data for most organizations, they think it's sort of this bat sign in between IT and the business. And after we've talked to them for a while as data professionals, they realize that data is pretty big and that both IT and the business are trying to get a handle on all of this. But of course, the longer that you're in this world, the more you really do understand it looks more like this. IT and the business out there trying on their own cannot possibly succeed in terms of what the actual amount of data is that we have to deal with around this. So let's move a little bit further. Again, the realization is that IT and the business really do need to get together to make a difference in this. And yet, when we look at what's happening in the data world, it's very much like the myth of the blind people and the elephant. Somebody says, I'm messing with the ears, so elephants are like a fan, right? And somebody else says, oh, no, I've got the trunk over here. And elephants are like snakes. Well, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah, somebody else has got the leg, and they think it's like a tree, and somebody else has got the tail and says it's like a rope, and somebody else says, no, elephants are big and solid. They're like walls, right? Well, they're all correcting it. None of them are totally correct. So our unrefined definition of data management is that there's great things that are happening in the data world. Of course, if we use the elephant or any sort of living thing as an analogy, it's probably not the best, but data comes in from various sources and it's used various ways by the business. And anything that happens between the data sources and the data uses is the purview of data management, but that's not still a great definition. In fact, if we want to take it a little bit further, we can say the sources, data management, and reuse are the real important part. And so our refinement here from the last slide is just simply to say that our real focus in data management is not between sources and uses of data, but it's between sources and creating reusable data components. And that's really important. But even that's not really good enough. And so this is a preview of a slide from the new book that I'm working on data literacy. And the idea here is that while we have sources, there are some specific skills. We tend to talk about things on the left-hand side of this diagram as being data engineering related. And they are specialized data skills in collection, in evaluation, in preparation, in evolution, in access, and storage. That word might be evaluation. I haven't vetted these slides yet. I'll have to go back and check that. Anyway, and then the other side is really the place where most data science people approach this and where the popular press has been approaching it too. Data science, delivery, presentation, storytelling, all of these things are about data exploitation. And all of those are very good. Notice again, they are sources. We're doing things to them as we are starting to use them. But it really still doesn't get the whole picture because we don't have the reuse component in there. And when we put that in, we really do realize that if we don't engineer for reuse, it is much harder to make reuse happen after we've already started to exploit the data. And that is not at all the way we should go about this process. So I'm working on this thing. Maybe some of you all will have some suggestions for this. This is how we do things in this community, is that people have good ideas, and we say thank you very much for those good ideas, give you credit, and move on. Of course, another part of this, I've just thrown these golden data governance arrows in. It really does say that the scope of our data governance efforts are much broader, in fact, than we thought they were originally around this. And so we're seeing an expansion of even that category as well. Now, most people think of this and they think of data management, but they don't necessarily think to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But we'll start off at the very bottom. Most of us remember it from high school. Maslow's hierarchy of needs says that if your food, clothing, and shelter needs are unmet, then you will never be by definition safe. And if you are not by definition safe, you will never be part of something else. You'll never have love or belonging in that context. If you don't understand how you fit in with a larger group, you'll never have self-esteem to know that you play your part very, very well. And in fact, all of these 4 levels are in fact prerequisites to getting to what we call self-actualization all the way at the very top. There's some new terms for this. People are calling it flow and other types of fancy things, but it's all basically back to Maslow, which just means operating at your highest potential. And these hierarchies are very much like data management. While all the press has been focused in on things like MDM and big data and blockchain and all the rest of the things that are there, these are really just the tip of the iceberg. And that, in fact, if we want to understand this from a more practical perspective, we need to understand that these practices are important as well. And the practices that we have here include these 4 additional pieces: data governance, data quality, management, data strategy, platform architecture, and operations, plus, of course, some supporting practices. The things on the top half of this chart then, the golden circle of data, where everybody wants to be and where everybody wants to write about because it's the cool stuff, are technology-based pieces. The pieces on the bottom half are capability-based pieces. And it is absolutely critical that your organization develop these capabilities in order to be able to better take advantage of the technologies that we have up on the top of this. Once again, we can do all of this, but the biggest question I get at Data Blueprint when people are just calling us up out of the blue is to say things like, well, Peter, I understand about this, things have to occur first and then, blah, 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 but can you do it faster? And the answer is sure, I can do it faster. And if I do it faster, it will take it longer. It will cost more, it will deliver less, and it will present greater risk to the organization than if we had done it properly in the first place. And the proper way to do this is to take those 5 practice areas that we talked about and bring them over into an integrated structure of practice areas. We now understand that while we have lots of data, we can't possibly address all of it at once. And so data has to be taken in terms of slices or chunks, however technical term you want to do. And we need to manage it coherently. That we need to have now employed a set of professionals around data governance, and these activities are absolutely key to making sure that things happen. So we now have enough experience to say data governance professionals are part of the equation. That we need to do this with a good understanding of the data lifecycle, that we need to maintain fit for purpose data, and that we need to do it with the right processes and the right architectures if we're going to get this stuff right. And all of this has to be supported by the organization, what we call organizational supporting practices. The other thing that's critical on this series right here is to understand that your data foundation can only be as strong as its weakest link. So I'm going to show you a very short, quick example here and just tell you what the scale is. First of all, everybody gets 1 point for showing up. If your processes are able to be repeated, that is, they're manageable, then you get 2 points. If you have written them down somewhere, then you get 3 points. If you measure something in around that, then you get 4 points. And if you use that information about the managed process that is carefully documented to change, hopefully for improving that process, now you are operating at an optimized level. The vast majority of organizations are between a 1 and a 2 at this point, even though we've been working on this for a long, long time. And the reason for that is quite simple. Colleges and universities are teaching students the wrong stuff. And I say that fully as a college and university professor. It's a very frustrating situation. But let's take this and make it a little bit even more concrete here. So we can measure each of these 5 areas. And in this example here, I'm going to put out that the data management strategy, the data quality, the data operations, the data platform, and architecture are all being done at a level 3, which you can already see from the information I've given you is much higher than average in these organizations. However, if their data governance practices are still at a level 1, the entire practice is only at a level 1 because, again, your data can only be as strong as its weakest link. And in this case, without a good piece of data governance around this, and you'll see how this plays into MDM in just a second, it wouldn't matter if you put $1 billion into data quality, you would still have a level 1 practice. So as you can see, data management is an integrated set of practices around these areas that have to all be performed well in order to achieve good results. My measures show that about 1 in 10 companies do this. This is critical information for you to take forward to your management because it means that your organization, if it starts to perform or is already performing at above average, at above a 1 to a 2 level, then your organization has the opportunity to achieve a sustained competitive advantage within your environment. Let's move on a little bit and talk specifically about why you're all here today, which is what is reference and master data management. Now, hopefully you're not seeing this for the first time, but this is our data management body of knowledge, and I'm using the older version of this because it has these wonderful little breakouts on this. And here is reference and master data management. Notice what we talk about are codes, are talking about customer data, talking about product data, dimension management. All of these things are interesting topics. And from the original version of the DMBOK, we used to include this slide. If you buy the DMBOK version 2, you will not get this slide for some reason, but we do have it available if you need to. And again, it'll be certainly part of the package that Shannon sends out to you at the end of her 2 business day catch-up period in this area. So our definition that we took right from the top of that slide is planning, implementation, and control activities to ensure consistency with a golden version of contextual data values. And unfortunately, that's a little bit hard to figure out exactly what we're talking about here. But let's first of all distinguish, if you walk into a random crowd of people and start talking about MDM, the vast majority of them will think you're talking about mobile device management because our portion of that egg is much smaller than the mobile device management pieces. So be careful if you sign up for an MDM conference and make sure that they are talking about the same MDM that you're hoping to talk about. On the other hand, this golden version does apply to manufacturing. And we've seen a lot of work in there. When we release the final version of an operating system, be it Windows or the Mac OS or Linux or anything else, that final version is often referred to as a golden source. Well, that's the best source. But look what's happening to our definition here. Gartner now has said that MDM is a discipline or a strategy as opposed to a technology. It's a strategy where business and the IT organization work together to ensure the uniformity, accuracy, semantic persistence, stewardship, accountability of the enterprise's official master shared data. And notice I pulled a silver bullet in there as well because a lot of people think that silver bullets, and MDM is certainly one of them, are going to solve them. It is often sold as a technology-based solution. I'll tell you a couple stories about it as we get a little further forward. But what we're really talking about is to say we're going to start speaking with the same vocabulary for parts of our data. Official, consistent set of identifiers. These core entities include parties, places, and things, but a subset of them to which transactions are allocated. And this is a really key piece of this. We'll come back to that in just a second. Let's break it out even further and talk specifically about reference data management, just for starters. So for example, in this case, it's control over the allowable domain values that go into the various databases that you're using. Standard terms, standard codes, standard business definitions, and again, looking for that consistent shared use of this. I find this is a really good point to introduce some concepts around taxonomy to the discussion. And it's not just where these values are stored, but it's where this taxonomy is stored. I love to tell a story, perhaps some of you have heard it, about every car I've bought new from Toyota. I've bought 2 of them new in my life. They've sent me a little notice right after I bought the new car that said, hey, by the way, wouldn't you like to buy a new car? And I kind of consider that pretty dumb. I just bought a new car, and they're telling me, why don't I buy another new car? What's wrong with the one I just bought? So what we're telling the Toyota dealers here, in this case, certainly from firsthand experience, they can't tell the difference between a current customer and a potential customer. I've also had these same dealerships tell me that the car I bought last week is on sale this week. And again, that's probably not the way you want to treat your customers. We ought to have different messages going about to reinforce potential customers than we do to reinforce our current customers. And we can even take this a little bit further, because management looks at this and says, oh, is that taxonomy? That's easy. And then you say to them, great, what about the concept of an ex-customer? Is that a current customer that's no longer buying things from you, or is it a potential customer, but you happen to know a little bit more about them because you used to do business with them? By the way, we're not going to answer that question today, but notice my point here is that this taxonomy that we're describing should be maintained exactly right here in the reference data management. We can go one step further than that. Current customers, do we want to distinguish between residential customers and commercial customers? Perhaps it depends on what our business is. This is where you all, with your domain expertise and years of experience in your various industries, can better answer this question. But let's just take this little simple taxonomy that we have here and add in one more concept that might be confusing. Where do we throw the concept of a VIP customer? Now, I love my Toyota cars. I drive them until they drop dead. My first Toyota lasted me 19 years. My second one is in its 16th year. That's pretty good stuff. I like Toyota products. I just happen to think Toyota's not all that good with respect to understanding their basic reference data, and they do a poor job of reference data management. Let's make the example a little bit more concrete. Reference data is data that's used to classify. It's used to identify, for example, an order. An order can be new, an order can be in progress, an order can be closed, or an order can be canceled. And notice, according to this taxonomy, which is not necessarily right for your organization, an order cannot be modified. We either close the existing one and create a new one, or we go with what is in there. We have reference data in the United States for a 2-letter code. I have a funny video on that if you ever want to see it, for 2-letter state abbreviations. Let's get a little more practical. Let's pretend that we're doing business between the United States and the United Kingdom. Many people will abbreviate the United Kingdom as UK. After all, it seems like a good abbreviation. However, your organization may decide to use the standard codes for that, which would be GB, standing for Great Britain, not UK, which means if you do a query against your data set trying to find the number of British customers and you ask for the number of how many equal UK, you will probably come up with not the right answer of how many customers do you have in Great Britain. But you will definitely find out the number of errors that you have in your reference data where the United Kingdom was not put in and the Great Britain GB 2-letter code was in fact put in there. I have seen companies who said, oh, well, we'll stop doing business with the United Kingdom or England or whatever because of exactly a dumb query like that. Yes, it does happen. So that's reference data. Now let's do master data. Data about business entities providing the context for transactions, but it's not limited in this case to predefined values. So the difference between reference and master data is that reference data, we say what are the allowable values. In master data, we do not. These allow business rules to dictate format and allowable changes. For example, we probably are not going to send out checks for 1 penny or $0. We may have parties, and you can see there's lots and lots of different types of ways of representing parties, locations, to provide the context for these transactions. The term master data came about from the original term of master file. And I'm going to show you how that used to work in the old days. I had an old master file, and that old master file might say that my balance in my checking account as of this morning was $100. And I went and had a transaction for lunch where I took $5 out of the bank to go buy enough money for a sandwich. Sometime later that evening, a update program would have then changed the new master file balance, to $95. I'm going to go back on that. There we go. Again, balance of $100, take the $5 out, and now my new balance comes in at $95. And by the way, I'd like to get some error messages out of that as well, just to make sure that everything worked exactly the way it should. Again, catch me at a conference or something. I'll tell you stories about this where it's happened. We've had lots and lots of good things, but this is what we're talking about for master data. Something needs to be updated. In this case, my balance might need to be updated. My address might need to be updated, or depending on what's going on, perhaps even gender might need to be updated. Now, did this work for a Canadian company? And in Canada for this year, we were governed by Canadian law that mandated that our reference data maintain all 9 of these possible gender codes: male, female, formerly male, now female, formerly female, now male, uncertain, won't tell, doesn't know, male, soon to be female, and female, certain to be male. Now, whether you like this or not, it didn't matter in Canada at the time because it was the law. So this was a mandated piece. The reference data is the fact that we maintain 9 possible gender codes. However, the golden source of the gender of your customer, Pat, would then maybe say that that gender code is whatever it is. Hopefully that's a really good way of describing these, because both of these provide context for our transactional data, things that happen to Pat in this case. That's our reference and master data. Let's go a little bit further. Why are they important? Well, first of all, before I dive into my story, most organizations have not had a lot of experience in managing their data. And again, I blame that squarely on the college and university community, which teaches everybody that the only thing we're going to teach you about data is how to build a new database. And don't get me wrong, that's guaranteed employment for everybody that's on this call, but it doesn't really serve our organizations that well. So data needs professional administration to make up for past neglect, one of my favorite sayings. And here's a company that I worked with at one point where they had bought an MDM thing. They actually had paid $60 million for this. It's a lot of money to spend on a technology solution, and that's how they implemented it. They brought in a literally bunch of consultants who spent $60 million, including the purchase of the software, and they installed it. And it worked for the first year. Now, the problem was after 1 year, there was really confusion as to what the system had done. Why did they install it? There was very little education done around this, and there was absolutely no governance. I could literally walk the halls, and did walk the halls, and hear people say things like, I didn't know where to stick the data, so I stuck it in the new MDM. If people are doing that, you have already failed. And notice that I had a stool there, and that the stool, because it had only one leg, it fell over. Yes, this was $60 million, and remember, if our internal rate of return is maybe 5%, we have a big amount of savings that need to be done in order to make sure that this investment will actually achieve positive. So let's continue with our story. After the year and people were doing things and not correctly, there was general agreement that they should restart the effort. Okay, maybe they don't need to reinstall the software, but they certainly needed to clear out all of the rubbish that they had in the existing master data management system and start all over again. And their root cause analysis gave them a consensus that they had poor quality data inside the system. Coupled with the inadequate training, it did not help. Well, that added a little bit more to the organization's tool up there. They had purchased a data quality tool, so that gave them 2 legs on their stool. They still were missing the 3rd leg. And it was not a very good, again, leg, you'll notice it's a little bit different because just buying a data quality tool doesn't help you any more than buying an MDM tool. You've got to put in place an integrated set of practices in order to make this actually work. One of my most profound lessons over the years has been a very good one taught to me by Lady Ada in this case. Bad data plus anything awesome is still bad results, or as many of you know it more simply, garbage in and garbage out. There is no alternative. If I have garbage data coming into any sort of perfect model, I will get the same results, garbage. And that is true whether the thing in the middle is a data warehouse, machine learning, business intelligence, blockchain, AI, master data management, data governance, analytics, any kind of technology. All of these efforts require good data. For example, if I start out with good quality data and I do a little bit of analysis, I may discover that the two left-hand arrows that I send into these various initiatives, in this case combining business intelligence and blockchain or AI and any other sort of technology, we can actually eliminate data flows in the organization, data stores in the organization. But more importantly, we want to only feed these very expensive technologies we have at the center of most of our organizational technology with good data, because if we put good data in, we then have the possibility of getting some good results, quality that will come in, quality that will come back out. Now, the reason I show you the DMBOK version 1 on this is because most of the time I think we didn't do as good a job as we could have with articulating what's supposed to happen in those pie wedges. And the answer is almost nothing works well by itself. Again, I've already given you the stool analogy here as a three-legged stool. And in this case, the organization started out by saying, oh goodness, we did a bad job by doing just reference and master data management, whereas it really should have been probably three areas that were combined on this. Similarly, we could look around and say, oh, okay, maybe there's metadata that we should do. Again, each of these are potential combinations. In our case here, we're a lot more likely to get it to work when we have this combination of reference and master data, data governance, and data quality as our three pieces in this. So again, at least three functions within here. Data governance, reference and master data, and data quality are typically required at the very least, because the three of these are interrelated. When we look at this, data governance is what makes the case for, and more importantly, is responsible for the implementation of the Master Data Management Initiative. That data quality, while it's an important component of, is necessary but insufficient for success. And finally, our skills around master data management allow us to have capabilities that constrain the ability of data governance to go off track and make sure that data governance efforts are focused very strongly in this area for the purposes that we need in this organization. There are lots and lots of examples. I'm going to give you a couple of them here. This is another organization that I've worked with, which had a very, very complex process. They had knowledge management practices, master data management, data quality, and they linked those directly to their metadata. Again, this is not something that you have to do. It's something that you can do that may be interesting, or maybe you have already done, and changing one aspect of this. Right here you can see from this diagram, there's no way I'm going to change master data management practices without affecting operational data, in this case the metadata, and the metadata is connected back out to the data quality and the knowledge management practices for this organization. Here's another one that shows bunches of different operations, gets different types of governance violations, different types of activities that are here. And once again, you can see that master data management practices in this case are highly integrated and highly intricate in all of these other practices. The reason we need to do this is because we started out doing what we call paving the cow paths in IT. Yes, all of these systems started originally. Each of them had their own sources of data around them. No problem with everything so far because the data is perfectly optimized for the processing that is occurring within each of these areas. Where it gets fun and complicated is that now we want to start connecting the dots As we move back and forth and move our data back and forth and around, we discover that you get tied in knots pretty quick. The Gordian knot, in fact, is the way most people describe it. And this Gordian knot, while it's fun, is really, really, really hard to make work in its existing shape. Ideally, we'd like to go back and redo this, and master data management technologies can oftentimes be an aid to doing this. So let me show you a solution for this. Again, this is not how it will work for your organization. It's how it works for one organization. But the pattern may, in fact, be very valuable. Those systems I showed you on the other chart, the paving the cow path, were the systems of record as they described them. And they understood that had the best source, the most current source of information about this. This particular organization, it was a financial organization, had a very big effort focused in on trying to make contact with their customers. They felt they had become disconnected from them and wanted to get to know them better. You'll hear this as 360 or other types of customer reference management types of activities. So these systems of record, in this case, we built on top of this some sort of a little metadata practice that could go in and tell us when the last time a customer record had been updated. That was important to the financial organization because we could then store those in a cached repository that was very close to the customer edge of where things were. And when a customer came in on one of the various channels that they had, we could add into this a latency check. Just said, how long has it been since we've talked to this particular customer? And we could put on a Bluetooth-enabled piece if they had a mobile device with them, or other types of activities, even notify a customer service representative that, hey, come on inside and update your address and we'll give you a toaster, or whatever it is that we're doing in there, and try to initiate that contact and get those individuals to update their service. But until I know which system has the best source of information about it, there is absolutely no way that I can go about actually looking at what these customers were doing and attempting to have a good message with them. For example, it would be a really bad and embarrassing thing for them to say, hey, we haven't heard from you for a while, when in fact you were just there yesterday, right? It makes it look like the organization doesn't actually know what it's doing. And gosh, I have seen a lot of that around on these things recently. Once we get that updated information, we could then put that back into the system of record, the appropriate system of record, and make sure that we updated the rest of the contact information so that we wouldn't be saying, hey, we haven't heard from you for a while, but instead say, hey, Peter, you bought a car last week. First of all, let me send you out a thank you letter for buying our car, and then tell you that just a reminder, inspections are free at this dealership for the rest of your life, which might be a better sounding message than, hey, you bought a car from us last week. Don't you want to buy another one this week? We also could add into this architecture the ability to do external data processing and layer it into this environment as well. So again, this is not for you, but just seeing how one organization used the strategy of master data management as they were attempting to become more well-known about their customer habits. Let's take another example, pretty different in this case. Now, you might think the word tank might be a kind of an important word for some types of organizations. Let's just pick a tank. Here's 1, 2, 3. I might put petrol, gasoline, in these tanks. No problem, right? This organization, however, was purchasing a ERP, a major accounting package that had extensions into the rest of the business. And to them, every time you moved gasoline from one tank to another, it was a sale, a retail sale. And the organization had called us in particular because they said, look, not every type of tank we have is a retail sale. Here are 4 good examples of non-retail sales. I'm going to move it from a tank that is at a refinery to a tank that is on a truck. I might move it from the tank that's on the truck to the tank that's on a boat, or the tank that flies. All of these are valid, absolutely valid moves for us to do, but we don't want to count them as retail sales. So the dilemma the organization was faced with was, should they, A, modify the existing ERP package so that it would work correctly with their business practices, or B, implement master data management as a non-technical strategy and simply say, nobody in this organization is allowed to use the word tank under any circumstances. By the way, I have the same rule with customers. I do not let any of my groups that I work with use something as vaguely defined as customer. You must qualify it. Are we talking about a retail customer, a wholesale customer, a tax customer? There are all kinds of customers that we need to understand about, and the word customer is at too high a level of abstraction to ever be useful in the data world under these sets of circumstances. So tanks. This organization simply said, we are not going to change the software, which would be expensive, and we'd have to apply the same changes to all the new releases of the software that were coming up. Instead, we are going to say the first three things that I showed on this slide, 1, 2, 3, are going to be called retail tanks. In fact, they actually were specific: portable gasoline tanks, mobile gasoline tanks, stationary gasoline tanks. And they all had the word retail associated with them. All the rest of them were not. These were internal representations of how to move this. And by using this, this organization saved several $1 million annually by not going in and playing too much with the software, but instead just requiring people to use a controlled vocabulary. This was a tremendous success for them, and they've done a marvelous job with it. I would not recommend this to every organization. I would not say that every organization is capable of pulling this off. But in this case, for these guys, it did make sense. Of course, we also have another type of tank that we want to be careful of and not confuse, which is that type of a tank. So again, you can see how reference and master data can play an important role in organizations. And our architecture should look somewhat like this. On our reference data, we will have business data stewards. By the way, I also think that qualifying stewards at the initial phases of data governance is a non-productive exercise. It's hard enough to get people to understand that stewardship is a fiduciary relationship and that we need to have them. So I want to say you're only allowed to use the word steward for the first 5 years of your data governance effort. And after you've gotten it running and have achieved some results, then you can differentiate between steward types. But starting out with 14 different ones is probably not a good way to do it. Anyway, back to our MDM. The business data stewards will determine what are the allowable values. They manage the codes that we are using in the organization. They are the ones who will go through on a regular basis and say, stop using UK when you're supposed to be using GB. And in fact, what they'll try to do is build into procedures checks that make sure that none of this polluted data gets into our system without it being checked first of all. That code management system updates on a controlled basis the reference database of record, where we're storing all of our tables that are used as reference tables throughout the rest of the organization. These then go back and forth and interact with whatever the other systems we have. They could be OLTPs or warehouses or whatever, but you can see it all comes from that controlled vocabulary that we start right at the very beginning. When we're looking at this, we can also then bring into play the external data, just as I showed you on the financial institution example that I gave you just a few minutes ago. Now let's move to master data. Again, same type of thing, but remember, master data is different from reference data in that reference data has controlled vocabulary. Master data does not have the controls because customers are going to be broader. But notice it looks very similar in these areas where we have something that is controlling different allowable values on the way in. We include this as part of our quality review that we're doing and as part of our governance to determine where and how effective checks and controls we should have in play in order to do this. And we couldn't combine these into a combined architecture here that allows us to give a little bit more detail. I'm not a big fan of these diagrams because many people try to implement them directly in their organizations. That's generally not a good idea. Your organizational architecture should reflect your business record, should reflect your business practices in here. But it's a good place to take a look at it. And yet our failure rate for master data management is about the same as it is for all IT projects, which is to say 1/3 of them come along and achieve specific results in a way that actually helps the organization do this. that 2/3 of these projects are over budget, over time, or do not deliver the functionality that they are supposed to deliver. Over half of all organizations surveyed in this spent over $4 million a year just on reference data alone. So these are important numbers that people will have to bear. And if you have trouble figuring out how to do this, Shannon and I do another webinar a little bit later in the year where we show more specifically how to put the cost data together for these. But it's actually not too hard a way of describing this. And the root cause for these failures, I mentioned dentist in this case, because if my dentist came at me and said, I've got a 1/3 chance by drilling into your tooth that I will make your cavity go away, I would find myself another dentist. 30% of MDM programs are outright complete failures. Master data management is a critical component for service-oriented architecture. 70% of those have not worked. 80% fail because of ineffective leadership who do not understand this. They think if you buy the software and install the software, their task is done. Your task is just beginning. In fact, one of the more important and interesting aspects of master data management is that you should not, in my opinion, buy a master data management package first. You can build your own by just putting together a SQL Server stack. Every organization has SQL Server programmers in there, and they can do a great job of this. And then playing with that stack. I've got several customers that are in the 3rd year of their homegrown master data management initiatives, and they're saying to me now, I'm ready to go in and talk to the vendors because I can now have a good conversation with the vendors. But if we just go out and buy a package and implement it as a technology or as a project, it does not work. Again, many people think that MDM is the same thing as an enterprise data warehouse or an enterprise research planning program. Again, it is not. It's not an IT effort. It is not separate from governance and quality. You can see from the slides, it is absolutely integrated. And that these MDM initiatives need to be implemented with appropriate technology. Again, I'll pick on my own state here. I'm in the state of Virginia. About 10 years ago, we bought a master data management package from a vendor. And interestingly enough, the group that was implementing it throughout the entire state decided to call it enterprise data management. And we said, why didn't you want to call it master data management? And they said, because we've already used MDM as a mobile device management, so we can't get people confused. Of course, if you call it enterprise data management, many people will think that it is. The key to this was that the organizations that were involved were told to go ahead and use it, and we'll figure out at the end how much it's going to cost you. Well, that's not going to work. If you want to see some of the failures we've had in technology in Virginia, I can tell you stories about all of them. Let's keep going on, though, with our little task, because there's another aspect of master data management, and that is that it has to be integrated with your business practices. You need to be able to look and understand across organizations. We have done all kinds of work where this might be the task for doing something for a process. We have 12 tasks that actually make up that process. Why? Because we paved the cow path. We started out and we simply automated the existing processes without looking to see what advantages we could gain overall process-wide by the implementation of information technology, and master data management is one of them. So the industrial work would break this down into tasks, but now we can tool around and say, look, the only things that are happening here that provide value-added activities are task 1, task 7, and task 9. So in almost all cases, your organization will benefit from similarly reorienting tasks around the business practices. If you have a mismatch between your business process architecture and your master data management initiative, the two of them will have great problems synchronizing up. Reunifying those tasks into coherent business processes, as well as the idea to get rid of abandoned outreach business processes and assumptions, et cetera, a key part of most master data management initiatives. How does one go about the process of understanding existing business processes? Well, if you're not one of the fortunate organizations that has 1 in 10 organizations a fully managed business process architecture, you can do some things. This is a wonderful company in Europe called QPR that you can take and feed log files from your various systems to it, and these log files will actually come about and show you what look like preliminary process models. These are not absolutely perfect process models, but I'd sure rather start from this process than I would, in fact, trying to go back to the very beginning with a blank screen of paper and saying, all right, tell me about your business. Another interesting illustration of organizations that got process wrong is the automobile industry. In many cases, the automobile industry kept trying to replace the traditional engine with a electric engine. We've gotten better. Obviously, Tesla is doing well, but it was really back to Toyota again that got this thing right in the first place. The Prius solved this problem by adding a second engine, not replacing the first one. If you've not been in one of these hybrid cars, they're very common these days. You'll notice that when the accelerator is pushed, different engines come into play. And the question is, when do we turn them on and off? And the answer is potentially many times a minute. But certainly a much more integrated operation is what you're seeing here in this. Currently, the engine is running and the electric motor is also running. But again, in a few minutes, we may change. I put my foot on the brake, and now you get a recharge on the battery. What a complex system compared to the old way of doing it. And yet, this is the only way we managed to make this work. So hats off to Toyota for creating these hybrids, and we'll see if Elon Musk actually produces all the electrical ones that we want. But at least for the moment, this looks like our transition strategy. And having this understanding of what your business processes are is crucial to this. You do not need to have this much, but it is a very good chart to take a look at what are things we need to look at all the way around. So let's look at some very specific building blocks out of these things. And many of these are lists that I'm simply going to leave you with without bothering to read all the words for you, because that's pretty boring and you guys don't want to hear that. So what are our goals? Provide authoritative, reconciled, high-quality master and reference data. It means when I look up my record, I know exactly where it is. Interestingly enough, I had a ticket, not a bad ticket, that I got from the toll authorities around here in Virginia recently because I had changed my license plate a year ago and they didn't tell me I had to update my tag. So my battery went dead in my tag and they looked up and found I didn't get a toll from me. They looked at my license plate, because they do that, and found out I didn't have a tag because my license plate was there. Well, I've had the same car, I've already told you, for 16 years at this point. There's no question in this case that I had this. I had to tell them that I had to, and they hadn't bothered to update this. Right? And they hadn't told me that when I changed my license plate, I would also have to update their information as well. Again, they waived all the costs, so it was no big deal. This also drives us to lower cost and complexity. Master data management should be about making things cheaper and better. If it's not worthwhile. And finally, if we have these master data management categories correctly, then we will have much more of a head start moving in towards our business intelligence analytics types of activities. So what are some of the things we need to do? Understand reference and master data activities, identify master and reference data sources, define and maintain the data integration architecture, implement. Again, I won't read these all to you. These are really good checklists that we've put for you in the DIMBOK. Specifically, who needs the information? What data is available? How does it differ from other data sources? How do we do our reconciliation process? What valid values can be shared given all of this? Who are the people who are involved in it? What are the different deliveries? We certainly want to push out different types of cleaning activities to the very point of capture in this case. We want to make sure that we understand the models, the documentation, that we have good information, that everybody understands what the concept of a golden record is, and that we include quality metrics and reports in that are appropriate for the organization in order to pick these up. There are a bunch of different roles and responsibilities that you will have to play with. This is an incomplete list, but to give you an idea of the suppliers, the consumers, the various participants that we have to bring to bear on all of these bits. And finally, as I mentioned before, yes, you can spend tens of millions of dollars on this, but really, you've already got most everything that you need out there, which is a SQL Server stack. Now, I'm not saying that you can put only a SQL Server stack and get it to work, but there are lots and lots of tools that you can use in order to do this, and you already have bunches of them. So it is not required that you go out and spend $10 million to get started with master data management. Instead, it is a much lower price point, and the capabilities are much more important to you than the actual technology is in order to do this. All of these building blocks are great places for you to go back and start to say, what is happening, where are we on our journey in this, and how can we make these tools use to the value that we're trying to get to in the organization. A couple of things on the last part of this. When you start to look at business process and rule engines, that's not something that's very popular around this. And I do want to shout out to Ron Ross, who's got a new book on business processes. I think it's called Information Blueprints. I may have to get him to give me a little money since he's using some of my copyrighted terms there. Just kidding, Ron. And change management tools, very important that you have those as part of the process, because we do have classes of professionals that we've put in place that do understand all of these and do a great job of helping us to understand everything on these. Because the real problem is a fool with a tool is still a fool, and I have seen so many people spend money where they shouldn't in those areas. Let's talk a little bit here now about guiding principles and best practices. Shared reference and master data belongs to the organization. I detest the term data owner. The only person who owns the data is the head of the corporation or the governor of your state. And the governor of your state is going to delegate that to a chief data officer as quickly as they can, because the last thing a governor of your state wants to be in charge of is all the data in the organization. If you allow people to own their data, then they will claim it's theirs and you can't do anything with it. Second point, it's an ongoing program. The goals are not going to be achieved by one data project alone. That the business data stewards are authorities accountable for determining what these golden values are going to be in your organization. That the golden values are the best, gold, right? That you want to replicate master data values only from golden sources. If you get it from anywhere else in the organization, it should be considered and actually able to be proven that it is of less quality. And that reference data in particular requires formal change management. If you don't use formal change management, then nobody knows what's actually going on. 10 good practices for master data management. Again, active involved executive sponsorship, which means you have to find somebody on the business side who cares about not technology, but about the business results that this technology can bring into place. That the business owns the data governance process and the MDM or customer data initiative, they're often called in that case. That strong project management and organizational change management skills are required. That these should be done in a holistic approach using people, process, technology, and information, because most organizations focus on this just as a technology piece. That you build your processes to be ongoing and repeatable, supporting continuous improvement. The idea, again, that we're going to solve anything in our first iteration is pretty much laughable, but by the time you get to your third one, you should be achieving some fairly good traction. That management needs to understand the importance of a dedicated team of stewards. I get this a lot when I go into organizations where they'll say, okay, so you want to do MDM, that's great. We need some stewards in order to help implement that process. They say, well, here's 10 people, and you can have a tenth of each of these people's time. And if I say that, I say, great, I'll thank you for the 10 of people, but I would rather have one full-time person who I can actually train up to do this, because at 1/10 of your time, you are simply not going to spend the requisite time and attention on these projects in order to get your knowledge up to where it needs to be. Dedicated is best. And data stewards have a fiduciary responsibility. It's very difficult to switch back and forth between, just imagine if you were a lawyer or a doctor and you said, well, 1/10 of my time I spend dealing with confidential information. So we'd be asking the question, is HIPAA covering this? We don't want to ask that question. Doctors and lawyers don't. We shouldn't ask our stewards to do it. Dedicated is much better. Understand what your hub model should be and how it integrates with your internal systems and external content providers. Make sure that you can get all of them in place in order to get this to work going forward. Resist the urge to customize. It's likely that if you spend way too much money on this, you will end up with a second MDM system. Again, it's like having a second watch, which means you're going to try to stomp out the first one and get the second one in place if that's going to work. Make sure that you stay current with the patches. Test. Yeah, I don't need to tell you guys most of that stuff. It's just not a good idea to try to rely too much on anything that is not proven in terms of its technology. We're getting close to the end here, and I want to give you just a couple more little bits. First of all, a couple of quick success factors, and I did mention I want to show you a little quick video on this. So success factors, again, more likely if people understand the strengths and weaknesses of MDM. It is not going to solve your problems by itself. It's an aid to help you solve problems as you get through things. You're taking small steps. We call it ready, set, go, right? Little bits and pieces in order to do this. Make sure that you put expectations in place, because most organizations just do a really bad job of saying when the system's installed, everything's going to get better. It doesn't work that way. We need to go way upstream, make sure that the data that's coming into the systems is there, and then flush out all the bad stuff and put the new one. And think of it more like a blood transfusion. Probably not the best metaphor there, but we need to have information architecture as a key component for all of these pieces. Your governance framework has to be making sure that you have people that understand master data in here. If they haven't had experience with it, they're probably not going to be making the right data governance decisions around this. Alignment with the business vision, demonstration of the value. Again, if we tell results that we've cleaned up so many data items, nobody cares. But if you say that cleaning up the data items results in a brand new X, Y, and Z, that's good. I'll tell you a quick story of that to the very end. Use a strategic framework to view all activities of the cycle in there. Gain high-level sponsorship for it. Make sure that your results are going to produce something that somebody in the business cares about. Again, vision strategy that closely aligns with it. Use the metrics. Get business case development. Propose and understand the KPIs. Measure the system before and after to determine the change. Translate the metrics into financial results. And make sure that the business and the IT work together on this. Now, let me just tell you a quick story, which is that one of the healthcare organizations I was working at had decided that they were going to show me that they were using data very well. So I was visiting, and they came and said, hey, look, we're going to go off here because we've got great knee surgeons at this particular organization. And I watched actually the announcement, and I could see a couple of the surgeons in the back were laughing. And I went and chatted with them after the presentation. I said, why are you laughing? And they said, well, because the director of the hospital system here seems to think we do a lot of knee surgery. We actually don't. But the director of the hospital does not understand that knee surgery is the default hospital admission code. Well, here's a very smart gentleman who is making very bad decisions using very bad data. Again, an MDM would have been something that would have helped that particular process through. Now, with the remaining time I have, I want to show you one more example, which is how to start people understanding this. And this is one of my favorite pieces of, I guess we'd call it a meme in today's environment here. It's something we call the Seven Sisters from British Telecom, and our colleague Dave Evans gave us this to use on this. So I need to turn Miles Davis off in the background, which was what I was doing here, so give me a quick minute, and I'll come right back into there. I don't want you guys to be blown away by Miles Davis. There we go. Turn Miles off, and now you can hear, in this case, the Seven Sisters. So there we go. We're back, and here we go. So hopefully that wasn't too loud and you got a good experience from it. If you have trouble with it, I've got the link to it on our website down at the bottom of the page on this. But let's just go over what happened. They had a master data management initiative. They wanted to show the value of it. Previously, information was stored in hundreds of databases across British Telecom. Processes were duplicated. Effort was wasted. It was a bit messy. So now we're sorting all of our data into 7 piles called the Seven Sisters, and you can see them: revenue, pricing, user, customer, contact, inventory, product. Pretty easy, and people understood this and got it and did a wonderful job in terms of making people aware what was going on in these areas. So while we've gone through a bunch of things here, I think that now you all are better able to understand the information that was on this slide here, which is the summary of everything that we've talked about. And it's at the top of the hour, and I'm going to turn it back over to Shannon so she can tell you about some other things that are coming up, and then we can move to the questions and answers.
Peter, thank you so much for another fantastic presentation. Just a reminder, if you have questions, feel free to submit in the bottom right-hand corner in the Q&A, and I will be sending a follow-up email to all registrants by end of day Thursday with links to the slides and links to the recording of this session. So diving in here, Peter, having a difficult time getting IT and business counterparts to understand the MDM is not the same as a data warehouse. How would you succinctly explain the difference?
The difference is that a data warehouse is a piece of technology. Master data management is an approach. And it's a very good question, and it's one that happens a lot. If you're having trouble with that, ask some of your colleagues what they have done. Call me, call Shannon. She can tell you these stories. The key is that IT correctly thinks that if installing packages is key to this, they should put their efforts into installing packages. Master data management is not just about installing software, but it's also about changing people's behavior. Again, as a strategy, what we might say is that we're going to concentrate on getting, let's just talk about the hospital admission codes harmonized correctly so that we don't make another $30 million mistake as this particular healthcare organization was about to do. Really good question, really fairly straightforward problem. And it's about making sure that people do not understand this. If you, again, when you get these slides, you'll get all the references to them, but there's lots and lots of really wonderful cases of people doing a really good job with the technology and a really poor part of the people and process side of this. You need to have all three legs in place in order to make the stool stand up correctly.
Love it. And this next is a statement versus a question, but I'm sure you have a lot to comment on it. Reference data is the backbone framework to our enterprise logical data model. We need perfected metadata.
That is correct. And of course, the bit I was talking about earlier, we're up front here when we're talking about reference master data and the taxonomies. Obviously, if I don't get the taxonomies correct, then there's no way that we'll get the reference data correct. So if we can't say things like, for this organization, a reference customer is a subcategory of current customers of the category of all customers that we have, we are not going to be able to define anything that's going to work from a master data management perspective, because these technologies depend on those taxonomies, those specific metadata items that the questioner was referencing are absolutely critical. So this is, again, if I was going to make it a four-legged stool, I would add metadata around it as well, but I think you guys can all see the link there. It's absolutely key. Thank you for the comment.
And what SQL stacks help build internal MDMs?
Anything. I hate to be as flip as that, but literally you can build, let me give you a very specific example. Again, healthcare organization, and they're just trying to keep track of their doctors. So they got presented with a $10 million bill, a proposal from a vendor to implement master data management in this organization. Now, a $10 million investment in order to pay off properly at the internal rate of return that this company required was 5%. That means the next year we would have to come up with, in this case, $500,000 worth of savings to show it, assuming that all $10 million was spent correctly and invested correctly. So if we don't go to the state of saying, hey, this is going to result in tangible, specific outputs very, very soon, benefits to the business, then there's no way it'll get up and over that. If you have trouble figuring out that whole internal rate of return thing, there's a great book called The Phoenix Project where they talk about it as one of many sub-themes in the entire book in there. But it turns out that many of these large technology investments will never achieve a positive return on investment for organizations. It's a big, deep, dark, dirty secret. So the specific question was, okay, so I've got a SQL Server programmer. What we said was, to this healthcare organization, what are you having trouble with? And they said, oh, well, one of the main problems we have is we don't know which physicians have admitting privileges at which of our facilities. So we said, great. So the first MDM project will be about keeping track of your physicians. So first of all, that meant they had to come up with an organization-wide definition of what a physician was. They then had to figure out what a admitting privilege was, right, and how to do this. And they put it together in about 3 tables in SQL Server. Just put it over on one part of the organization and said organizational entities that need to know about whether these physicians have admitting privileges need to do it through this system. That taught them an awful lot about their internal processes. And from that, they were able to expand and say, okay, let's take it from doctors, and now let's bring it up a little bit more. Remember, this is not everything that's out there about the doctors. This is simply whether Dr. X has admitting privileges at facility Y. All right, let's get the nurses. Let's get the rest of the staff on. And they built this up over time. And they are reaching the limitations of their SQL Server, as organizations will. But after 3 years of doing this, they now also understand how much business value they will get from these types of activities. And they know that $10 million is the wrong number to invest in a technology-based adjunct to their already good master data management practices that they have developed within the organization. I think I said all that correctly. I hope it was clear. If not, by all means, push back and let's continue the dialogue.
And what was the name of Ron's book?
I'm going to have to look it up and tell you. I just dropped it off somewhere else. It's got Blueprint in the title. If you look up Ron Ross and say Blueprint, you'll find it.
Yeah, I'm just looking it up now myself, because we are actually doing a webinar with him at the end of the month.
Fantastic. Great guy.
Yeah.
Wonderful material, and looks like a pretty exciting book.
Yeah. Business Knowledge Blueprints. There we go. Okay.
That's it. Business Knowledge Blueprint. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah. That's good. Is that all the questions you guys have today?
Oh,
so what's the industry standard success rate for MDM and average time for production?
I don't know about average time for production. Standard success rate is 1/3. So that's not a good track record. These things cost a lot of money. They are difficult to implement. They have to be integrated into your environment. And when they do, just like most technology projects, it consumes all the budget so that your training, testing, and transformation are never done. And you put the thing live, and people say, I couldn't figure out where to stick the data, so I stuck it in the MDM.
And if you have more questions, feel free to submit them in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So, Peter, what are some examples of some of the KPIs related to an MDM program?
Well, they're going to vary from organization to organization, but let's go to, in this case specifically, we've been talking about healthcare. So many of the hospitals now are under an edict that says if you are discharged from a medical condition and that medical condition reoccurs within 30 days, that the hospital ends up having a penalty around that. So that would be a good place to start looking for those types of measures that are in there. The hardest thing I find in most organizations is that IT generally does not have a good idea of what organizational strategy is important, and consequently can't build reporting systems around those KPIs to make it work. I did one organization where they swore up and down that they had 1,400 KPIs. And I'm sorry, but there's no way any organization can manage that much complexity, particularly a large organization. So simple is going to be better. It's kind of like strategy, right? Strategy is not a 100-page document. Strategy is everyday low price. Skate to where the puck is going to be. That's strategy.
Love it. Everyone's quiet today.
All right. Well, short and sweet sometimes works.
Yeah. I'll give you all a quick second here. Anything additional you want to add, Peter, before we wrap it up?
Well, just as with all of these things, Shannon is so good about doing this. I've included a couple of additional reference sources for you here that you can get more information. I do not have Malcolm's new book on it. And Malcolm also has a wonderful book on master and reference data in there. So.
You know, I have heard a couple of speakers, Peter, say that MDM is once again on the upswing and super hot and is critical to businesses once again this year. and should be the number one thing people are looking at. Would you agree with that?
It's absolutely the number one place we go to when we talk about organizations. So when you're looking at trying to do more with data, it makes sense to understand your existing strengths and weaknesses. And most organizations are relatively weak in this area. So it's a good candidate for doing some good work early. But again, let's just think about it. If you invest $1 million into it, you're still going to have to prove that that $1 million results in some tangible return on investment within a fairly short time frame. If you don't have that return on investment, somebody's going to come along in a couple of years and say, you've put lots and lots of money into IT and it hasn't paid off for us. We need some different people in IT.
I love it. Well, Peter, thank you so much for another great presentation. Love it as always. Thanks to all of our attendees for being so engaged in everything we do. And just a reminder, I will send a follow-up email by end of day Thursday for this webinar with links to the slides and the recording. And I hope you all have a great day. Stay safe out there.
Cheers, everybody. Thanks so much, Shannon. Bye, everybody.
Bye.